The valley was still dark, dawn just a faint bruise on the horizon. A sharp whine sliced the quiet, not a truck, but the cold hum of a drone, circling like a vulture. I pushed open the cabin door, the hinges creaking under my grip. The air bit my skin, thick with pine and frost. A red light flashed from above, the drone's beam locking onto me, burning my eyes. On my fence, a new sign glared at DNGR Zo a Restri Haiti EFRCD. A camera, small and predatory, clung to the oak beside it, its lens staring me down. I stood on the porch, coffee cold in my mug, meeting that lens with a steady gaze. They marked my house a danger zone. I used to draw those zones, red lines on maps, kill boxes in deserts where I called the shots. Now my own land was tagged, my name a warning. The drone's hum taunted me, but I didn't flinch. I memorized its arc, its altitude, my mind already mapping countermeasures. Karen thought she'd cornered me with her signs and her tech. She didn't know I'd walked through worse ambushes than her paperwork traps. I'd been the hunter before. I still was. They marked my house a danger zone. I'd show them what a real danger zone looked like. Ever been labeled a threat? You're not alone. Follow now. My cabin was my stronghold. Every plank laid with intent. Dawn bled through the pines, painting the valley in cold light. I started each morning the same coffee brewed from rainwater. Grounds weighed to the ounce, the kettle's hiss sharp in the quiet. Mug in hand I walked my land, boots crunching frost. The goat pen sat east, its angle blocking the road's view. A choice, not chance. I tested the latch, twice the iron biting my palm. Linda's eyes met mine, her horns a quiet warning. Inside I cleaned my rifle, the bolt gliding under my thumb, its click a rhythm from years outrunning chaos. On the table, my notebook held the valley's pulse in drone paths, scratched in pencil, patrol routes timed to the second. I adjusted a line, accounting for a new camera I'd spotted on the ridge. Every mark was a plan, every plan a shield. I dragged the floodlights left, closing a gap in the northern approach. Their wires, buried deep, hummed when I tested them. My cameras, tucked in knotholes, disguised as rocks, fed green, black feeds to my tablet. I checked them twice daily, my eyes on every shadow. The valley lied with its silence. I'd learned that in places where quiet hid knives. My lamp burned low, kerosene flickering over maps and steel. I didn't light the cabin after dusk. Light invited eyes. This wasn't paranoia. It was discipline carved into me by wars I'd left behind. My peace was a perimeter, hard-won, hand-built, not a promise. Karen's voice rang out at the town hall, cold and measured, like a prosecutor reading charges. John Tanner endangers our community. She said, her blazer sharp, her eyes scanning the crowd for weakness. By morning, flyers littered every mailbox in the valley, their glossy pages screaming lies, behavioral instability, isolation patterns, potential for violence. My address was printed in bold, branded non-compliant property. A confidential hotline number begged neighbors to snitch. A yellow sign sprouted on my fence, zip-tied, not nailed above Armand Rastreted at ACCSS Hio Amanandi. She didn't need her drones or cameras this time. She turned the valley against me, soft and surgical. At the general store, Pete, who'd swapped hunting stories over my cash for years, pushed my money back. Policies changed, he muttered, staring at the floor. The Wilsons, who'd laughed over ribs at my place last July, veered across the road when I passed. Their boy's voice carried, "Mom, why's that house red?" I kept walking, coffee mug in hand, my face a mask. Karen was good. I'd taught psyops in dust, choke camps, shown soldiers how to seed fear, how to make silence a noose. She'd boofin'. She didn't just spread fear, she built a cage. The valley split and I was the fracture. Neighbors stopped looking me in the eye. Harris, the old man with the mutt, burned her flyer in his barrel, smoke curling black. Others didn't. I saw it in their windows, pinned to fridges. A scarlet letter I couldn't shake. I didn't fight back, didn't beg for trust. I walked the ridge at dusk, tablet glowing with camera feeds, logging her patrolman's routes. My notebook grew thicker, houses that burned flyers, houses that didn't. She wanted me a pariah, a ghost in my own valley. I knew her game. Make the target a villain, then justify the strike. She played the village. I stayed quiet and watched. The valley turned colder, the air sharp with frost and something heavier, surveillance. Karen's HOA had upped their game, and I felt their eyes before I saw their toys. By Monday, fake motion sensors sprouted along the road, cheap plastic boxes with blinking LEDs, meant to spook more than detect. Cameras, obviously dummies, their lenses painted on, clung to utility poles angled at my fence. At dusk, a speaker hidden in the pines crackled to life, droning. This area is under HO monitoring for community safety. The voice looped, robotic, designed to gnaw at nerves. I stood on the porch, coffee mug steaming, and let it play. Their psychological preparation was textbook, make the target feel watched, cornered small. Tuesday brought the sheriff's deputy, his cruiser idling at my gate. Routine security check, he said, clipboard in hand, citing community reports. Too vague to pin down. His eyes flicked to the dingy Arzuan sign Karen's crew had left, then back to me. I nodded, said nothing, and watched him leave. He wasn't the threat, just a pawn in her containment zone, a show of force to rattle me. I didn't rattle. I'd faced worse than badges and loudspeakers in places where mistakes cost blood. I didn't tear down their fakes, or call the county to complain. Silence was my edge. Instead, I turned my land into a grid, a fortress disguised as a farm. Every move was deliberate, every tool a weapon. I started with the perimeter, working under moonlight to avoid their cameras. I buried tripwires, thin, taut cords rigged with bells, under the grass, their vibrations tuned to catch footsteps, not wind. At the porch steps, I embedded pressure sensors, flat discs that pulsed a signal to my tablet if triggered. Their range was tight, calibrated for human weight, ignoring Linda's hoof beats. On the roof, I hauled up gear I hadn't touched in years. A thermal imaging system, military, grade, once used to spot insurgents in desert dark. I rewired it for the valley, setting it to scan after 11 p.m. When Karen's patrols liked to prowl, its lens swept a 300-yard radius, painting heat signatures in 300 acres of my land in greens and grays, every goat bleat and pine needle mapped in my head. I adjusted its sensitivity to flag anything warmer than a raccoon. The feed streamed to a monitor in my bedroom, a silent sentinel while I slept. At every door and window, I installed triggers. Small, soundless devices that sent alerts to a control panel by my bed. A flicked latch, a nudged frame, and a light would blink, waking me without a sound. The cabin became a nerve center, every entry a choke point. I rigged infrared floodlights, invisible to the eye but blazing to my cameras, ready to snap on if the thermal picked up movement. The valley's quiet was my ally, amplifying every twig snap, every boot scuff. My land wasn't just a home, it was a reverse surveillance grid, a black hole for Karen's tactic. Every step her crew took, I'd know. They'd see nothing. I worked alone, tools in hand, sweat mixing with frost. The notebook on my table grew thick with sketches, wire paths, sensor zones, blind spots erased one by one. I mapped her patrol's habits. Dusk and dawn, always 3 men, always the same routes. I clocked their fake sensors' battery life, their speakers' range. My tablet hummed with data, cross-referenced with the thermal feeds. I didn't sleep much, didn't need to. Discipline was my fuel, forged in wars where hesitation was death. One night I caught a patrol on the thermal. 2 figures, creeping near the eastern fence, their heat signatures glowing like ghosts. The tripwires didn't sing, but the infrared lights snapped on silent, bathing them in invisible glare. My cameras rolled, catching their stumble, their curses, their retreat. I watched from the cabin, coffee cold, tablet glowing. They thought they'd spooked me with their toys, their deputy, their signs. They thought they'd caged me. They were wrong. I'd built a message discipline. Every move calculated, every signal controlled. Karen's game was noise, flyers, speakers, signs. Mine was silence, a grid that spoke only to me. The valley was my board, and I'd flip the pieces. Her crew could prowl, her drones could hum. They'd find nothing but shadows. I stood on the ridge at dawn, the valley spread below, my mug's steam curling into the chill. Linda snorted from her pen, her horns catching the light. The fake sensors blinked uselessly along the road, their LEDs dimming as batteries died. Karen thought this was about fences, about land. She didn't see the real fight. Control. Well, the quiet war of who breaks first. They think it's about fences. It's about message discipline. The valley was a black void, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and sharpened instinct. I sat in the cabin, the tablet's green glow my only light, coffee cold in my mug. The air was heavy, frost seeping through the planks, but my focus was on the screen. Motion detected. Sector 2. The infrared feed showed 4 figures crossing my eastern fence, their heat signatures tight, moving like they'd rehearsed. Shoei patches glinted on their vests, their hands gripping flashlights and clipboards. Karen's enforcers sent to seize my land. I didn't move. My grid was live, every wire and sensor humming. They'd walked into my rules of engagement. I'd prepped for this since her first flyer hit the valley. My land wasn't just a farm. It was a containment zone, every inch mapped, every approach a trap. The intruders hit the first tripwire 20 yards in, a buried cord under the grass. No explosion, no gunfire, just a low-frequency hum, a sonic pulse from speakers I'd rigged in the pines. The sound was subaudible, designed to claw at balance, to make guts churn without a source. The lead man staggered, his flashlight beam jerking wild. I watched the feed, my finger hovering over the next trigger. They pushed forward, slower now, their radios crackling with static. At the yard's edge, they tripped the second layer 800-watt floodlights, infrared triggered, spun to life from the roof. The beams didn't just blind, they pivoted, erratic, like searchlights hunting prey. The men shielded their eyes, their shadows dancing jagged on the frost. One shouted, "Cut the power!" But the lines were buried, the batteries hidden. I leaned back, the tablet's glow catching my mug. They were learning. This wasn't their game. The third trap hit at the porch steps. Pressure sensors, flat and invisible, caught the second man's boot. A strobe array, salvage from old riot gear, erupted, flashing in chaotic bursts, sensed to disorient. The man dropped to his knees, hands clutching his head, clipboard skittering across the gravel. His partner lunged to help, only to trigger the sonic pulse again, louder now. A teeth-rattling wave that mimicked incoming fire. The team froze, their formation crumbling, radios spitting garbled panic. "Fall back! Fall back!" I stepped outside, boots deliberate on the porch boards. The air smelled of ozone and fear, the floodlights hum mixing with the men's ragged breaths. I didn't draw a weapon, didn't raise my voice. My mug was in one hand, the other pointing at the nearest camera, its red light blinking in the dark. Urban Warfare Manual Section 14.2, I said, voice low like briefing a squad. Never assume a silent perimeter is undefended. The leader, a wary guy with a clenched jaw, stared, his flashlight trembling. They hadn't expected resistance, let alone a lecture. Linda, my rogue goat, chose that moment to charge. She'd slipped her pen again, and barreled from the shadows, 200 pounds of horns and spite. She hit the third man square in the gut. A dull thud as he went down, gasping, his radio flying. The others flinched, one swinging his flashlight like a club, missing her by a yard. Linda snorted, stamping the frost, her eyes glinting under the strobes. I almost smiled. She was my chaos agent, unplanned but perfect. I pointed again, this time at the thermal camera on the roof, its lens sweeping slow. "Everything's recorded," I said. "Every step, every mistake." The leader's eyes darted to the camera, then back to me. He saw it now, the gap between their playbook and mine. Karen had trained them for neighborhood disputes, for fines and flyers. I'd written rules for war zones, for nights where control was the only currency. Their vests, their clipboards, their HOA badges, they were props. My grid was real. The floodlights spun faster, the strobes pulsed harder. The sonic hum spiked. A final push, and the last man dropped his gear, hands over his ears. They weren't fighters, they were bureaucrats playing soldier. I stood still, letting the grid do the work, letting their fear fill the silence. The leader barked, "We're out!" and they stumbled back, dragging their fallen man through the fence's cut wire. Linda snorted, tail flicking, as if claiming the yard. I walked the perimeter at first light, collecting their debris, a cracked flashlight, a torn HOA vest, a clipboard with Karen's looping signature. The tablet showed the footage. 4 men, routed without a shot, their panic captured in 1080p. I saved the files, encrypted them, and added them to the lockbox under the floorboard. The valley was quiet again, but I knew better than to trust it. Karen's move wasn't a raid, it was a probe, testing my defenses, my resolve. The twist wasn't their failure. It was what I found in the clipboard's pages, tucked under a seizure notice, a single sheet, stamped OCS Directive 47C. The Office of Civic Stabilization again, the same shadow from her last leak. A line jumped out, subject Tannard, escalate containment. Neutralize autonomy. My name, my land, pinned like a target. Karen wasn't just a local bully. She was a cog in a machine, one that didn't stop at signs or drones. This was bigger than the valley, bigger than me. I stood on the ridge, coffee bitter on my tongue, Linda grazing below. The valley stretched out, my grid invisible but alive, wires, sensors, cameras, all humming. Karen thought she could break me with her rules, her labels, her men. She didn't know I'd built my life on breaking systems like hers. She read neighborhood rules. I wrote rules of engagement. Stay for the full takedown. Hit that follow. The valley was a frozen sheet, dawn carving sharp edges into the pines. I stood on the porch, coffee mug steaming, the air biting with frost, and the faint tang of scorched grass from last night's rout. The HOA's failed raid left debris scattered across my yard, a cracked flashlight, a torn vest, and a USB drive, small and black, half buried in the dirt where their clipboard had fallen. I picked it up, its plastic cold against my palm, and knew it wasn't an accident. Karen's crew didn't drop things by mistake. This was bait, or a misstep. Either way, it was mine now. Inside, the cabin was dim, the kerosene lamp casting a flicker over my table. I plugged the USB into an air-gapped laptop, a relic from my Spec Ops days, its ports taped to block leaks. The drive held one folder OP, CIVS. My pulse didn't jump, but my eyes narrowed. The name screamed contractor lingo, the kind I'd seen in classified briefs. Ops designed to look civilian, but funded by men in suits who never got dirty. I clicked it open. Files spilled out. PDFs, spreadsheets, video logs, all stamped with a seal. An eagle gripping a gear, captioned Office of Civic Stabilization OCS, Resilient Communities Directorate. The first document was a directive, formatted in federal style. Operation Civilian Stabilization and Territorial Reclamation Initiative, CIVS Red Phase Execution Plan. The header listed a contractor, Vanguard Security Solutions, a name I knew from black budget contracts in war zones. The mission was clear. Reassert jurisdictional control over non-compliant autonomous zones through phased behavioral and territorial containment. My valley was one of 6 testbeds, rural pockets in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, 2 in Texas, chosen for their high autonomy demographics. Translation: people like me, who lived off-grid, answered to no one, and held land too strategic to ignore. A spreadsheet broke it down cold and coded. Columns label S prof, subject profile C, stat compliance status, T vals territorial value. My name SAT in red Tanner, John R. C stat non-cooperative. S prof former Spec Ops 37 deployments, psychological resilience high, autonomy extreme. T val criticals aquifer access, defensible terrain. Next to it a threat index alpha 1, neutralize via escalation. Other names filled the list. Harrington, Wilkes, Delgado, all veterans, all tagged, non-compliant, all living on land marked for reclamation. We weren't random. We were a pattern, a list of men who'd fought for freedom and now stood in its way. The directive's language was sterile but predatory. Target subjects exhibit resistance to consensus norms, necessitating containment through localized proxies e.g. HOA enforcement. Karen's OA was a shell, a front for Vanguard to test control tactics, drones, fines, SOPs, without federal fingerprint. A section on behavioral stress protocols laid it bare. Apply incremental pressure, signage surveillance, social isolation to destabilize autonomy. Document responses for predictive modeling. My house, my grid, my silence. They'd been data points, fed into some algorithm to see how long I'd hold. A video file Radichacid Barayefa 1 showed a conference room timestamped 6 months ago. A man in a suit, Vanguard's logo on his tie, briefed faceless suits. CIVS Tiard's red phase targets high-value resistors, break their independence, and you set a precedent for compliance. The map behind him glowed with red dots. My valley, the others. I froze the frame, my land a bullseye. I'd seen ops like this, designed them even, in deserts where control was the prize. But here on my own soil, another file, OP/Slow Joe 47, detailed my case. Every move was logged, the Dangiar Zoan sign, the fake sensors, the flyers calling me unstable. Karen's name appeared as Field Operative K. Whittaker. Her role, local compliance enforcement. She wasn't the architect, just a loyal cog trained to push buttons and file reports. A note flagged her escalation, subject Tanner's counter, grid detected. Recommend Phase 2 direct containment. The raid was her test run, my traps her failure. But the USB wasn't a mistake, it was a message. They wanted me to know they were watching, to see how I'd react. I leaned back, the chair creaking, the lamps flickered, dancing on the machete hung by the door. My tablet hummed, its feeds showing the valley still. Too still. I pulled up the thermal logs from last night, cross-referencing them with the USB's patrol data. The overlap was perfect, their routes, their gear, even their radio's frequencies. I'd outplayed them, but the game wasn't over. A final document, CIVS-PINDGME, hinted at what was next. Neutralized subjects will be relocated or reclassified. Non-compliant territories will transition to federal oversight. My land, my aquifer, my ridges, they weren't for houses. They were for leverage, a blueprint for control. I scanned every file, encrypted them, and burned copies to a thumb drive, stashing it in the lockbox with the raid footage. The laptop went dark, its screen a black mirror. I'd built this cabin to escape systems, to live free. Now the system was here, wearing HOA badges and contractor seals. The other names, Harrington, Wilkes, were out there, maybe watching their own valleys, maybe already broken. I wasn't them. I designed ops like this back when I wore a uniform and called it duty. CIVS was my prototype, stripped of sand and dressed in suburbia. I walked the ridge, coffee bitter in my mug, Linda's bleats echoing below. The valley was mine, every wire and sensor a line I'd drawn. The USB sat heavy in my pocket, its truth heavier. Karen thought she'd scare me with her signs, her men, her rules. Vanguard thought they'd outsmart me with their algorithm. They didn't know I'd written the playbook they were stealing from. I stood at the cabin's door, eyes on the thermal camera, its lens sweeping slow. The valley was quiet, but I felt the hum of their machine. Drones, suits, lists. They thought I wouldn't recognize the operation. I designed its prototype. Should I release this? Sound off below. The valley was a silent expanse, dawn's gray light barely touching the frost that clung to the pines. Karen had gone quiet, no flyers, no patrols, no drones humming over my land. The town was stunned, whispers rippling through the general store and church pews after her raid's failure hit the county news. I stood on the porch, coffee mug cold in my hand, the air sharp with pine and a faint metallic tang. My eyes caught it before my mind did. A new sign, bolted to my fence. Not Karen's cheap plastic but heavy steel, black with silver letters LPHA Naudal Refetide. Below it, etched deep, was a symbol, a triangle nested in a red circle, one I'd last seen in classified briefs, buried in military ops files meant for eyes far above my pay grade. I didn't flinch, didn't approach it. The valley's silence was a lie, and I knew liars. My thermal camera, perched on the ridge, still rolled, its lens sweeping the horizon. I glanced up, meeting its gaze. The status light, blinking red for weeks, went solid. Signal received somewhere by someone. My pulse stayed steady, but my mind shifted gears, replaying the USB's files, the OCS's directives, the list of veterans like me. This wasn't Karen's move. This was the machine behind her, the one I'd glimpsed in OP-5 Vestiripe Ray PAC. Inside, the cabin was dim, the kerosene lamps flicker, my only light. I opened the air-gapped laptop, its keys worn from years of use. The USB's data was still there, encrypted, but I didn't need it now. I entered a code I hadn't touched since my last deployment. A 16-digit string burned into memory. The screen woke. A black terminal with white text: strategic counter, manipulation framework, reactivation protocol. I type, fingers steady, phase 20A. Deploy regional node response. Counter community manipulation. Neutralize OCS escalation. A line of code flickered at the screen's corner, unprompted. Alpha response chain activated. Synchronizing regional nodes. My land, my grid wasn't just a defense. It was a hub, one of many, built by men like me who'd seen the system's underbelly and planned for its betrayal. Harrington, Wilkes, Delgado, the names from the USB weren't just targets. They were nodes like me, wired into a shadow network we designed in case the wars we fought came home. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and took a sip of cold coffee, its bitterness grounding me. The valley outside was still, Linda's bleats the only sound from her pen. My tablet hummed, feeds showing nothing. No drones, no patrols. But the solid light on the camera told me enough. The signal was out, my move logged. The OCS Vanguard. Whoever pulled their strings, they'd marked me Alpha 1, a threat to neutralize. They thought they'd isolated me with Karen's flyers, her signs, her fear. They didn't know I'd been building this board for years. My grid, a piece in a larger game. The sign's symbol burned in my mind, a call to arms I hadn't expected but was ready for. Karen was a pawn, her silence now proof she'd been pulled. The real players were watching, waiting for my next step. I closed the laptop, its screen fading to black. My rifle leaned by the door. The machete hung sharp. The valley was mine, but it was also a signal, a beacon. She tried to isolate me, but now I control the board. Still with me. You're ready for part 2.